let's start. So we're on 6.3 today. It's about Mendel and heredity. So Mendel's research showed that traits are inherited as discrete units. He discovered genes. Basically, he realized that there's packets of information that are transmitted from adults to children. He didn't know what they were at the time, but he discovered DNA and genes. That's really, he couldn't see DNA, he couldn't see genes, but he knew that there must be something like that that's been transmitted from parents to children. So that's what it means by discrete units. It means packets that you can identify and isolate. Okay, so Mendel laid the groundwork for genetics. He is the father of genetics. He was an Austrian monk in the 1800s. He was not well known at the time. It wasn't until about 50 years after his death that they realized what he had discovered. Here we go. It's right here. You see it, Joseph? Got it? Okay. So he was an obscure Austrian monk during his life, but after his death, decades later, they discovered what he had already discovered, and he became very famous after that. So he said that traits are characteristics that are inherited. Yes.
Would you mind going back?
Could you, well, let's see. It's this one right here. Mendel's research showed that traits are inherited as discrete units.
Oh, I see.
Huh? Genetics is the study of biological inheritance patterns and variation. And so Mendel was the first person to really study how traits are transmitted to offspring. He was the first one to really believe that that is what happened. Sorry. So one thing he discovered is that these genes are not blended. They're either or. Before Mendel, they thought traits were blended. So for example, if you look at a plant that has white petals, and there are two things that it could have. It could have white petals or it could have purple petals. What they believed would happen is if you mixed a purple with the white flower, you should get a mixture of those two things. You should get light purple for the offspring. What Mendel said is no, that's not what happens. You either get all purple or all white for your expressions. You don't get a blending of traits. It's either or. So that was a great discovery he found. Now, it's not true for all kinds of genes. There certainly are several genes that interact to make a blending of traits, like your hair color would be an example of that. You have several genes that work together to give you variances in shades of color, both in your hair and your skin. So it's not for every trait, but he was the first one to identify that there are certain traits that are either or. You either get one or the other. You don't get a mixture of them. So his data revealed patterns of inheritance, and to do his experiment, he had to decide a few things. And so he made 3 key decisions in his experiments to start with. So his first decision was this. He decided to use purebred plants. And what that meant is that a purebred always produced the same kinds of offspring. If you were to have two purebreds create an offspring, it always made the same traits for the offspring. So if you had two pea plants that were purebreds and they both had purple flowers, all their offspring also have purple flowers. You never would have anything besides purple flowers. They only have those two genes. Genetically uniform. So it means that they have no hidden genes. Purebreds have no genes that are hidden that could come up in later generations. They only carry one kind of gene. So that was his first decision. His next decision was that he would have control over the breeding. He would decide what plants to breed, what plants to keep separate. His third decision was that he would focus on 7 traits. These were called either or traits. And so in the pea plants, there were, you could have purple flowers or have white flowers. And that's it. You wouldn't have anything besides purple or white. So it's an either or thing. You would either have green peas or yellow peas. So that would be it. You wouldn't have anything besides yellow or green. You would either have smooth peas or wrinkled peas. So these are 7 either or traits. You either have tall pea plants or short pea plants. Everybody have those down? So these are the 7 either or traits. So I mentioned a few of them. We'll go through all of them. Also called all or nothing on here. So you either have purple or you have white flowers. Huh? Yes. You don't need to draw it, but you definitely should write these down.
Just the yellow ones or
the whole chart. But again, you don't need to write. You don't need to draw. You just need to write. So you either have purple or white flowers. That's the first one. The second one, you either have axial or terminal flowers. So axial means on the edges, on the sides. Terminal flowers are on the very top. So those are 2 places you can have the flowers, either along the sides or on the very top of the pea plant. The seeds themselves, the peas, can either be yellow or green. You can either have round peas or wrinkled peas. And the pods themselves could look different. You can have inflated pods, which you don't see the ridges where the peas are, or you have ones that are constricted where you can see the peas inside. Then you can either have green pods or yellow pods. And the last thing is you can have a tall plant or a short plant. They call it dwarf in here. So those are the 7 traits he focused on. These are the traits he knew only had one of 2 options. So everybody have those down? Just need to write down just the name or don't worry about drawing it, just the names. So Mendel looked at about 29,000 pea plants. He did many meticulous experiments over the years. And these were based on his experiments, he could then determine that these were all or nothing traits. Axial means on the side. So you see the flowers are on the side of the plant. They're not on the top, they're on the side of the plant. The terminal are on the very top. Everybody good on this one? Yes.
So you say they can't be axial and terminal?
Yeah, it's either one or the other. Yeah, that you won't have both. Okay, so Mendel used pollen to fertilize selected pea plants. That's how he can control the process. And so what he did is he removed the stamens on the flower. So if you look at the inside of the flower, you'll see the stamens. It looks orange or yellow. That is where the pollen is found. Well, that fertilizes the eggs in the plant. And so he cut out the pollen stamens. And then he would take pollen that he wanted and put it where the egg is to fertilize the eggs. And so the egg is further down. It's the green place that you can see on here, down here. And so he would then choose to fertilize certain eggs with certain pollen. And that would then create seeds, which would then create new plants that he wanted to breed. So his original generation was called the P generation, and that stood for paternal, the father generation, the first generation. And he would then cross the P generation to produce F1. F1, that's the Latin word for son, filius. That was the first generation, the first offspring. So what he's doing is called a cross, where it's deliberately breeding two different individuals to see what happens, to see what traits will emerge. No, you don't have to write down what's underneath the diagram, just the top 3 bullet points. Question? So when you see in the book, when it talks about test crossing or crossing, that's what that represents. It's a breeding of 2 plants or 2 organisms that you control. Okay. He then, after he had the F1 generation produced, he then let the F1 generation pollinate together to create the F2 generation. And he realized something when he did this. So he started with the P generation, where he took 2 purebred plants. He took a purebred purple plant, a purebred white plant. The purples always produce purple. The whites always produce whites. And what he wanted is like, if I take a plant that always produces purple with one that always produces white flowers, what would happen when I cross those 2? Would I get light pink petals? Would I get white or purple? And what he realized is that he always got purple when he crossed the white with the purple. You see the chat open here. Sorry, I'm gonna close this really fast and see. Okay, go back. To hear Lucy, this is the one they needed. So when Mendel did that, when he took the purebred white with a purebred purple and he crossed them, he always got purple produced. And so what he realized is that purple is dominant over the white. That if you had genes that are purple, genes that are white, and you cross them, you always would see purple expressed. The bottom one down, no. Sorry, I can't get to the chat if I have the full screen, so I have to go back and forth between the 2. So among the F1 generation, as I mentioned, they all had purple flowers. Now F1 are heterozygous. What that means is that the F1 generation has a white gene and a purple gene. Hetero means different. So the F1 generation has two different genes. They all carry a purple gene and a white gene. They got the purple from the purple pea plant, white from the white pea plant. So you know they carry both genes, only one is expressed. Only the purple is expressed, the white is hidden and not expressed. But what Mendel wondered is that maybe you can eventually express the white gene. And so he let the F1 generation pollinate amongst themselves and breed amongst themselves. And what he realized is that if that happens enough, you will get some white flowers. So in the F2 generation, he saw 1 out of 4 plants were white. So while it was not very common to get the white gene, it did happen. And so this showed that there are certain genes that can be hidden and carried through generations, and they can be expressed. And you can predict the probability of that happening. Yes.
You said it was 1 out of 4.
Yeah, in this situation it is. We'll talk more about, there's different chances of different things, but yeah, in this situation, it'd be 1 out of 4 that would have white. So basically we start with is that the purebreds had 2 purple genes. The top one had 2 purple genes, the bottom one had 2 white genes. When they cross, they give their children a purple and a white gene. And so the F1 generation has both a purple and a white gene. When they cross amongst themselves, they can give the children a purple and a purple gene, a purple and a white gene, or a white and a white gene. So if they have purple and white, they will still express the purple. The white stays hidden, but if they have 2 white genes, then they will look white. So you have to have 2 white genes to express the white color. And Mendel determined that there was dominant and recessive traits. Dominant traits means that you always express that if you have that gene. You don't need to write on the chart on here. We'll go through this, but don't write down all the numbers. Just the top bullet point for right now. So Mendel went through each one of those traits. So we talked about the pea shape, the pea color, the flower color, the pod shape, the height of the plants, flower position. And he realized that all of them had a dominant and recessive trait. So all of them had one trait that was expressed about a 3-to-1 ratio. So 1 out of 3 would have one trait. And the other trait would be dominant, it would be 3 out of 1. So we always found that ratio of a 3-to-1. 3 plants had one trait, 1 plant had the recessive trait. So for pea shape, you can see that most of them were round, some were wrinkled. So dominant trait is round. For pea color, yellow versus green. So yellow is dominant over green. That might surprise you because the peas that we eat are green. And so you might think, well, wouldn't green be dominant? Not always. Sometimes dominant traits aren't always the best traits or the ones that are even the most common. Flower color, purple was dominant over white. Pod shape, smooth over constricted. Pod color is green over yellow. Flower position is axial over terminal, and then plant height, tall over short. So based on those experiments, he drew 3 conclusions. He first said that traits are inherited as discrete units, which means that you don't have mixing of traits. You either have a purple gene or a white gene passed on to the offspring. You don't have some kind of combination of those genes. He also realized, based on experiments, that there must be 2 copies of every gene, each one from the parent. So for every trait that you have 2 genes, and you get 1 from each of your parents. what he also realized is that those two genes will move apart when they make gametes, when they make eggs and sperm cells. And only one of those genes will be put in the egg or the sperm cell. So if the pea plant has a purple and a white gene and it produces eggs, some of the eggs will only have purple genes, others only have white genes. But you won't have an egg cell with both purple and white genes. So these together develop the law of segregation, which says that when parents make eggs and sperm, the genes are divided into half and they're distributed like a deck of cards into the egg cells and the sperm cells. And you only get one copy of each gene in the egg and the sperm cells. So Mendel developed two laws. This is his first law. We'll talk about the other law later on in section 6.5. But for now, this is his first law he developed from his experiments. Any questions about that? So that's the last note for today. So what I want to do today is assign you homework on page 169, 1 through 5. If you have not finished the lab from yesterday, first thing you should do is finish your lab, if you have not done that yet, and then work on the homework after that on 169, questions 1 through 5.
No, this is, you do not to do that. And my arm's like this, and your arm's like this. I look at this. No, it's your arm. I look at you, your arm's like that, and then my arm